I saw a video recently of a mother doing blood sugar checks for her child who is very little and a type 1 diabetic. And their reading essentially said, like, hey, your sugar is 500, let's say. And the mother, being astute, being like, hey, last time that happened, my child looked bad. My child looks good. Let's do a finger stick and check it ourselves. And the finger stick was like 150, right? So instead of doing like a crazy amount of insulin, the kid goes down to a sugar of 20, and then you have a whole other issue. They use the brain and didn't create a second issue, right? And this happens in medicine all the time, but for whatever reason, we like to create a second issue. And sometimes how this will happen in the ER is blood sugar is one example. Just check it again. Potassium is another example, like, oh, it was a hemolyzed sample, but you didn't read it. And now you're treating this presumed potassium of 7, but you didn't check an EKG. There's no EKG changes. And now you do all this hyper K stuff. And now you have a potassium of 1.8 that you need to unmess up, right? Another example that I tell med students and nurses and a bunch of people all the time is blood pressure in triage. And sometimes it's the wrong cuff, or it was the right cuff, but the machine premature, or like the patient did one of these or whatever, right? Patient comes in with a blood pressure of 40 over Jesus, right? Happens all the time. But the patient like walked to the stretcher and they're talking to you. They don't have that's not their blood pressure. But sometimes in settings like that, people will be all hyped up. They're like, oh my goodness, they're about to code, blah. Like, if you walk up to them and they have a radial pulse and they're an adult, like a normal sized adult, their systolic is at least like 80 or 90. Like, you can work with that, right? So I think there's two lessons here, right? One, don't create a second issue trying to fix a first issue that isn't even there. But second, if a parent or like a loved one or an otherwise advocate for a patient comes in and it's just like, the vibe is off, pay attention to that. We say stuff like that in ER and critical care medicine all the time, like, the vibe is off. I admitted the patient, because that clinical intuition is important. Your intuition as a parent or as a spouse or as a loved one is also important.